I stood in the middle of my wedding reception hall watching my fiancé's mother try to erase my family from my own wedding photos. My name is Sophie Carter, I'm 32 years old, and I never imagined that the most important day of my life would feel like I was being quietly removed from it in real time. The photographer had just finished arranging everyone for the main family portrait. The lights were warm, the guests were smiling, and the room looked perfect on the surface. But then Linda Reed stepped forward like she owned the entire moment. "We'll redo this," she said calmly. "Only our side of the family in the main frame." My mother was still smiling. My father was standing straight in his best suit. My sister was holding her bouquet like she belonged there. They had traveled hours just to see me on my wedding day. And Linda didn't even look at them. She looked at me like I was the one who needed to be corrected. "They don't really belong in the center," she added softly. "Let's not complicate the picture." That was the moment the room changed. Even the background music felt distant, like it didn't want to be part of what was happening. And my fiancé Daniel, he said nothing. He just lowered his eyes as if the floor had become safer than my family's dignity. I remember thinking, this is not confusion. This is control. And I was standing right in the middle of it. Before I go further, if you've ever experienced family betrayal, toxic in-laws, or being quietly pushed out of your own place in someone's life, I want you to stay with me. Because what happened in this room didn't just expose a family, it exposed a system that I didn't fully understand until that exact moment. And what I discovered next changed everything I thought I knew about my wedding, my fiancé, and my own voice. But I didn't say anything yet. I just smiled. Not because I was weak, but because I was suddenly very aware of something Linda Reed did not know. I had already secured the marriage license paperwork. And I had not signed the final authorization. That meant this entire ceremony still depended on my consent. And she had no idea. But to understand why that moment felt like the ground shifting under my feet, you need to understand where I came from, and how I ended up standing in that hall being quietly erased from my own life. I didn't grow up rich. I grew up steady. My parents, Robert and Elaine Carter, were public school teachers. Our home wasn't loud with luxury, but it was full of respect. My sister Hannah and I were raised to believe that kindness mattered more than image, and that you don't measure people by what they own, but by how they treat others when no one is watching. That belief did not survive long in the Reed family. Daniel Reed came from money, from property, from influence that spoke before he even entered a room. And his mother, Linda Reed, didn't just manage a family, she managed a reputation. From the very beginning I felt it. I wasn't entering a relationship. I was entering a ranking system I didn't agree to. At first, Linda was polite in that careful, controlled way that never reached her eyes. She would ask questions that sounded friendly but felt like tests. She would smile and then somehow remind me that I was from a simpler background, as if simplicity meant something fragile and temporary. Daniel never argued with her. He would just squeeze my hand and whisper, "She doesn't mean it like that." But I learned something quickly. She always meant it exactly like that. At family dinners I was introduced as Daniel's fiancé, but later I overheard her once call me Daniel's project. A project. Like I was something still under evaluation. Even my work as a paralegal in family law was dismissed as something I would eventually outgrow after marriage. Like knowledge itself was temporary in their world. But what they didn't know was that my job had taught me something they had never considered. Documents don't care about opinions. And legal processes don't bend for family expectations. Weddings are emotional, yes, but they are also legal. And legal things have rules. I just hadn't decided yet how much of that truth I would need to use against the people who were slowly trying to rewrite my place in my own life. Because even before the wedding day, the pattern had already started. At first it was small things. I was placed at the edge of family photos. I was asked to help serve instead of sit. My voice was gently interrupted every time I tried to suggest something about the wedding planning. And every time I hesitated, Daniel would say the same thing. "Let's not create tension with my mom." So I stayed quiet. Until quiet started feeling like disappearance. And that disappearance was already beginning long before Linda Reed ever touched a wedding photo frame. Because in her world, people like me didn't stay in the center for long. They got moved. Slowly. Politely. Until one day no one remembered where they were supposed to stand at all. And I was about to find out exactly how far she was willing to go to make that happen. The mistreatment didn't begin at the wedding. It began in small, careful steps that no one could easily call cruelty. because on their own, each moment looked almost insignificant. But together they formed something unmistakable. A pattern. At every family gathering with the Reeds, I wasn't invited to participate. I was assigned roles. Set the table, Sophie. Help with the drinks, Sophie. Take the photos, Sophie. I became useful in a way that kept me outside of everything else. Inside conversations, inside decisions, inside belonging. Linda Reed always smiled when she handed me tasks like she was doing me a favor. "You're so helpful," she would say. "It's really nice to have someone dependable. Dependable. Not equal. Not included. Just useful." Daniel would hear it all and never challenge it. Not once. He would just glance at me, a little apologetic, and repeat the same line like a reflex. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But I started noticing something that made those words feel less like comfort and more like permission. Because Linda always meant exactly what she said, just never loudly enough to be questioned. At one family dinner, Daniel's cousins talked about international vacations, property investments, and business expansions. I sat at the table serving drinks, smiling politely, while my life felt like it had been placed in a separate room. No one asked what I thought. No one asked what I wanted. And when I tried to speak, I was gently interrupted mid-sentence, redirected, or ignored altogether. It wasn't open hostility. It was erasure with manners. The worst moment before the wedding came 3 months earlier. We were reviewing seating drafts for the reception. I had spent hours carefully organizing placements so both families would feel respected. My parents were finally placed in a central section where they belonged. When I sent the draft to Linda, she replied within minutes. Not with approval. With edits. My parents had been moved to the far back corner near the service aisle. Replaced with business associates I had never even met. I remember staring at the message for a long time before calling Daniel. "This isn't what we agreed on," I said. There was a pause on the other end. Then his voice, quieter than usual. "My mom said it had to be adjusted for space." Space. That word again. As if people could be reduced to availability. As if family could be arranged like furniture in a room that only belonged to one side. When I tried to push back, Daniel softened his tone like he always did when he wanted peace more than truth. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said. "It's just one day. Just one day." But I realized something in that moment. To them, my family was always just something. Just seating. Just placement. Just background. Never central. Never equal. Never permanent. And every time I accepted that silence, I could feel something inside me shifting. Not breaking, but learning. Learning the shape of a system that was slowly deciding where I belonged without ever asking me. And while all of this was happening, I was also beginning to understand something they never bothered to consider. I wasn't powerless. I was just watching. Quietly. Carefully. Because I had access to something they didn't respect enough to understand. Paperwork. Legal structure. The invisible framework that makes weddings more than decoration. 3 weeks before the ceremony, I requested a copy of our marriage license application from the county clerk's office. I told Daniel it was for clerical review. He didn't question it. He trusted my professional tone more than his own curiosity. That was their first mistake. Because what I found inside that file changed everything I thought I was walking into. The final authorization section was still unsigned. Not finalized. Not submitted. Not complete. Which meant the wedding they were building around control and image was still legally fragile. Still dependent on my consent. Still stoppable. And I didn't tell anyone. Not Daniel. Not my family. Not even myself in full detail. Instead, I started paying attention in a different way. Every seating change Linda made without approval. Every email she quietly redirected. Every RSVP she lost. Every small attempt to reposition my parents further out of sight. I saved everything. Screenshots. Messages. Drafts. Adjustments. Notes. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted proof. Because control only survives when it stays unrecorded. And I was no longer letting anything disappear quietly. So I didn't act. Not yet. Because I needed to see how far they would go when they believed I had no resistance at all. And the answer to that question was waiting at the altar. The only person who ever truly saw what was happening was my mentor, Laura Jennings. She wasn't just senior to me at the firm. She was the kind of attorney who could read a situation before it fully formed. The kind of woman who didn't react quickly because she didn't need to. She already understood the structure underneath the surface. One evening, I brought my wedding seating chart into her office. I told myself it was just for final review. But the truth was, I needed someone to confirm I wasn't imagining things. Laura looked at it for less than 10 seconds before her expression changed. "This isn't arrangement," she said quietly. "This is positioning." I frowned. Positioning. She tapped the back row where my parents had been placed. "People don't accidentally move families like this, Sophie. This is intentional hierarchy." The words landed heavier than I expected. Because part of me still wanted to believe it was all just carelessness. Miscommunication. Social difference. Anything softer than what she was suggesting. But Laura didn't soften things. She leaned back and asked, "Does Daniel challenge this at all?" I hesitated. "No," I said. She nodded once, like that answered everything she already suspected. "And what does that tell you about your place in this system?" I didn't respond right away. Because I already knew the answer. Told me I was not being included. I was being managed. Later that night I told my sister Hannah everything. She had never trusted the Reeds. From the beginning she called them polished but not warm. The kind of family that knew how to look correct in public but not how to feel real in private. When I told her about the seating changes, she went silent for a long moment. Then she said something I didn't forget. "They're not preparing for your wedding. They're preparing your role in it." That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. Because it didn't just describe what was happening. It explained it. And somewhere inside me something began to shift from confusion into clarity. Not anger yet. Just awareness. The kind that doesn't fade once you see it. Meanwhile, the wedding day approached like a carefully controlled performance. Everything was designed to look perfect. White flowers, soft lighting, expensive arrangements that created the illusion of unity. Guests arrived dressed in celebration, smiling, greeting each other like nothing beneath the surface could possibly be wrong. But I could feel it. The tension. Not loud. Not obvious. Just structured. Like a system waiting for a final test. And that system had one clear center of gravity. Linda Reed. She controlled everything without appearing to control anything. The timeline. The seating. The photography schedule. Even small decisions like where people stood during transitions. Even Daniel at times felt less like a groom and more like someone being guided through his own ceremony. My parents arrived early that morning, dressed carefully, holding themselves with quiet pride. My mother kept smoothing her dress like she didn't want to take up too much space. My father stood with that polite patience he always had in unfamiliar environments. They had no idea what had already been decided about them. I noticed immediately that their place cards had changed again. Moved further back. Closer to the service aisle. I looked at Daniel. "This isn't what we agreed on," I said softly. He didn't meet my eyes. My mom said it needed adjustment for flow. Flow. Another word that meant removal without admission. Before I could respond, Linda appeared beside us, smiling like everything was under control. "This is such a beautiful day," she said warmly, then lowered her voice just slightly as she leaned toward me. "Let's not create any unnecessary tension. Everything is already set." Not a suggestion. A boundary disguised as kindness. Then came the photographer's call for the family portraits. This was the moment I started to feel something shift inside me. Because I watched Linda begin to arrange people like she was designing ownership. Her family moved naturally into the center. My parents were gently guided backward. No one argued. No one questioned. It all looked smooth from the outside. Which is exactly what made it dangerous. Then she turned to me and said something almost casually like she was adjusting a schedule. "We'll take the main family photo first," she said. "Then we'll see what space is left for additional shots." Space. That word again. And for the first time I didn't feel confused by it. I felt it clearly. They weren't making room for my family. They were preparing to remove them from visibility entirely. And that was when I realized something even more important. This wasn't just about a wedding photo. It was about rewriting who belonged in my life's most public moment. And as Linda lifted her hand to reposition my parents again, I understood something very clearly. The breaking point wasn't coming. It was already here. The photographer asked everyone to take their positions, and for a brief moment, the room looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. A wedding. Soft lighting. Polished smiles. Guests standing in careful arrangement, waiting for a memory to be captured. But I wasn't looking at the camera. I was watching Linda read. Because I could feel it in the way she moved. Calm, practiced, certain. Like she had done this kind of quiet control many times before. She stepped slightly forward, positioning herself at the center of the group first. Not asked. Not assigned. Just assumed. Her relatives followed that assumption without hesitation, filling the frame naturally like they belonged there by default. Then her hand lifted. A small gesture. Casual. "Let's move them," she said. At first I didn't process it. Then I followed her hand. My parents. My mother was still smiling, confused but polite, the way she always was when she didn't want to cause discomfort. My father stood still, waiting for clarity that never came fast enough. And then the subtle movement began. Not forceful. Not dramatic. Just gentle redirection. As if they were objects in the wrong place. "Just for the main shot," Linda added lightly. "We want a clean family image." Clean. That word landed in my chest like something cold. My mother looked toward me then. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just searching my face for permission to exist where she already stood. And I realized something in that moment. They weren't asking her to move. They were waiting for me to allow it. Daniel stood nearby. Silent. Watching. And that silence did something worse than agreement. Made it normal. The photographer hesitated, lowering the camera slightly. My parents were now being guided toward the edge of the frame. Slowly, politely, invisibly pushed out of the center of my own wedding photograph. Something inside me tightened. Not anger yet. Clarity. I took one step forward. "No," I said. The room didn't react immediately. It needed a second to understand what had changed. Linda turned slowly. Her smile was still there, but it had thinned. "Excuse me. My family stays in the photo," I said calmly. A shift moved through the guest. Small. And easy. Like air pressure changing before a storm. Daniel finally looked at me fully. But still didn't move. Linda tilted her head slightly, as if I had misheard the entire situation. "Sophie," she said softly, "we're just organizing things properly." "That's not organization," I replied. "That's exclusion." Her smile tightened further. "This is my son's wedding," she said. "We're doing what's appropriate." Appropriate. That word always came right before control. I felt something settle inside me then. Not emotional. Not reactive. Final. I turned slightly toward the photographer. "Please don't take any photos yet," I said. The photographer froze. That was the first real disruption in the room. Linda's expression changed. Not anger first, but calculation. Like she was trying to assess how far this would go. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. I didn't look at her immediately. I looked at Daniel. Still no movement. Still no choice made. That answered everything I needed. So I reached into my clutch and pulled out the folded document I had carried with me all day without showing anyone. The marriage license application. I placed it carefully on the table beside the floral arrangement. "This is the legal document required for this ceremony to proceed," I said. "And it is not complete." A murmur spread instantly. Guests leaned forward slightly. The air changed from confusion to attention. Linda frowned. "That's not important right now." "It is the only thing that matters right now," I said. Then I turned to the officiant. "You cannot finalize this marriage without both signatures and proper confirmation," I continued. "Until that happens, this ceremony is not legally binding." The officiant hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any argument. Daniel's face changed slightly now. Not understanding. Recognition. Like he was suddenly realizing I had been holding something he never paid attention to. Linda stepped forward sharply. "You're turning this into something legal?" she said, voice tightening. I nodded once. "It already is." The room shifted again. Because now it wasn't a disagreement anymore. It was a structure collapsing under its own rules. And for the first time Linda Reed was not in control of the moment. She was inside it. And she couldn't decide how to step out. The officiant cleared his throat. "We cannot proceed until the documentation is properly completed," he said carefully. That sentence changed everything. Because now it was not about emotion. It was about authority. Linda's composure cracked just slightly at the edges. "This is ridiculous," she said under her breath. But no one followed her tone anymore. The room had already moved past her control. And I could feel it. The moment before everything becomes irreversible. I looked at Daniel one last time. And I knew this was no longer about a wedding. It was about whether I would allow my life to be arranged by people who had never once asked where I wanted to stand. And I wasn't standing still anymore. I was done being moved. The silence after the officiant's words didn't feel empty. It felt suspended. Like the entire room was holding its breath and waiting to see who would decide what reality we were in. Linda Reed broke the silence first with a short, controlled laugh. "This is absurd," she said, looking around the room as if searching for someone to agree with her. "We are talking about seating arrangements and now suddenly this becomes a legal crisis?" I stayed still. Because I knew something she didn't. This wasn't sudden. It was just finally visible. Daniel stepped forward slightly, his voice low, uncertain. "Sophie, maybe we can just pause and talk about this later. This doesn't have to happen right now." That sentence hit differently than anything Linda had said. Because it wasn't denial. It was avoidance. And avoidance was exactly how this had survived so long. I looked at him. "Later is how this always survives," I said quietly. "Later is why my parents were moved like they don't belong in my life." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone turned their head away. Another lowered their phone. Linda stepped in immediately, trying to reclaim control of the room. "This is a family celebration," she said firmly. "Not a courtroom." I nodded once. "You made it a system long before I said anything," I replied. The officiant spoke again, more carefully now. "Without completed documentation I cannot legally proceed," he repeated. That was the second time he said it. And this time no one challenged him. That was the shift. The room stopped being emotional and became procedural. Linda realized it at the same time I did. Her control only worked when people treated her authority as natural. And now it wasn't natural anymore. It was questioned. Daniel looked between us, his face conflicted. For the first time I didn't see confidence in him. I saw pressure. Years of conditioning fighting against one moment of truth. But he still didn't choose. And that silence told me everything I needed. So I turned slightly toward Linda. "You tried to remove my family from my wedding photos," I said calmly. "Not once. Multiple times. And every time you called it organization." Her jaw tightened. "And you believed I wouldn't stop you," I continued. Pause. Then I said the line that settled the entire room. "You misjudged me." The words weren't loud. But they carried. Linda's expression shifted for the first time into something sharper. Not anger alone. Something closer to disbelief that the structure wasn't responding to her anymore. Because it always had before. She turned toward Daniel. "Are you going to let her do this?" she asked. That question was not for me. It was for him. And everyone knew it. Daniel hesitated. That hesitation became louder than any argument in the room. I think we should slow down," he said finally. "Not defense. Not support. Delay." And that was when I understood something fully for the first time. This wasn't just Linda controlling space. It was a system where no one had learned to say no to her. And I had just become the first interruption they didn't know how to process. The officiant closed the folder slightly. "We cannot proceed today without proper completion," he said again. This time it sounded final. Guests began to shift. Whispering increased. The illusion of a smooth ceremony was gone now, replaced by uncertainty. Linda tried one last time to regain emotional control. "This is humiliating," she said sharply, her voice tightening. "Do you understand what this looks like?" I looked at her. "Yes," I said. "It looks like truth being inconvenient." That line landed harder than I expected. Because for a brief second she didn't respond. Not because she agreed. But because there was nothing she could say that wouldn't make it worse. The consequences started immediately. A few guests stepped away from the main seating area. One of Daniel's relatives quietly put their phone away. Another began speaking in low tones, already shifting perception. The officiant announced a pause until legal confirmation could be resolved. Pause. Not cancel. Not continue. Just suspended reality. And that word changed the room more than anything else. Linda's influence, which had filled every corner moments ago, started to shrink in real time. Not because I attacked her. But because the structure she relied on no longer recognized her authority as absolute. And she could feel it. For the first time, she wasn't guiding the moment. She was reacting to it. Daniel stepped back slightly, like he didn't know where he belonged anymore. My parents stayed close together, quietly holding hands now, no longer being shifted or adjusted or moved. They were simply there. And that, more than anything, mattered. Because I realized something simple in the middle of all of this. I wasn't asking for space anymore. I was deciding where I stood. And I was no longer waiting for anyone to place me. The room didn't end. But it had already changed. And Linda Reed finally understood that control doesn't break loudly. It breaks when people stop participating in it. The room didn't empty immediately after the pause was announced. It dissolved. Slowly, quietly, in pieces. Guests began stepping away from the center like they were no longer sure what they were part of. Conversations turned into whispers. Whispers turned into exits that no one officially announced. A wedding that was supposed to be carefully staged perfection was now something no one wanted to stand too close to. Linda Reed stood at the front of it all, still trying to hold the shape of control together. But I could see it now. It wasn't holding. It was slipping. Daniel stood near me, but not with me. That space between us felt wider than the entire hall. He looked exhausted, like he had spent years balancing between two forces and finally realized neither one was moving for him anymore. "I didn't know she would take it this far," he said quietly. I didn't respond immediately. Because that wasn't the point anymore. "I know," I finally said. And I meant it. But understanding something doesn't always repair what it damages. Linda approached me again, slower this time. The confidence she had carried earlier was still there, but it was thinner now, like a voice forced to stay steady under pressure. "You didn't have to turn this into something public," she said. I looked at her. "This was already public," I replied. "You just expected it to stay controlled." Her expression tightened. "I was protecting the family image," she said, softer now, like she was trying to reclaim moral ground. "You escalated this over seating and photos." I shook my head gently. "No," I said. I stopped accepting it. That sentence hung between us longer than anything else that day. Because there was no argument against it that didn't sound like justification. My parents stood quietly beside me now. My mother didn't look confused anymore. She looked present. My father looked like he had finally stopped waiting for permission to belong. That mattered more than anything that had happened in the hall. The officiant confirmed again that the ceremony could not proceed without proper completion and submission of the final documents. The language was calm, professional, final. There was no drama in it. Just law. And law does not negotiate tone. It only recognizes completion. Linda tried once more to speak, but her voice didn't carry the same weight anymore. People were no longer responding the way she expected. Not immediately. Not automatically. That gap was new. And she felt it. For the first time, I saw something underneath her control. Not cruelty. Fear. Not of me. Of losing structure. Of losing authority she had never had to question before. Daniel finally stepped fully back, running a hand through his hair, looking at both of us like he was trying to understand where he fit in a story that had stopped following his expectations. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do here," he admitted quietly. That was the most honest thing he had said all day. But honesty doesn't always arrive in time to change outcomes. I looked at him. "You're not supposed to choose between people," I said. "You're supposed to choose what you will allow to continue." He didn't answer. Because that distinction was something he had never been asked to make before. Linda gathered herself slowly, adjusting her posture, trying to recover something that no longer responded to her presence. But it was clear now. The room had moved on from her authority. Not loudly. Not violently. Just collectively. One decision at a time. I turned slightly toward my parents. And for the first time that day, I felt no need to reposition myself for anyone else's comfort. I was exactly where I chose to be. And that changed everything. Because what followed wasn't a collapse. It was consequence. Over the next weeks, there was no dramatic ending, no single defining confrontation after the ceremony paused. Just distance. Real quiet distance. Guests stopped calling. Conversations softened into polite avoidance. Invitations that once seemed automatic now required effort no one wanted to invest. Linda Reed attempted once to frame the situation differently, to explain it as a misunderstanding, a moment of stress, an emotional overreaction. But the narrative didn't return to her. Not fully. Because too many people had seen the structure underneath. And once people see structure, they stop believing in performance. Daniel and I spoke a few days later. Not in anger. Not in collapse. Just in clarity that had taken too long to arrive. I think we wanted different things, he said finally. I nodded. I think we did, I replied. There was no blame in it anymore. Just recognition. And sometimes that is the quietest ending. I moved out of the emotional space I had been trying to fit into and into a life that didn't require negotiation for respect. My parents didn't have to be repositioned anymore. My sister didn't have to be careful about how much space she took up in conversations. And I stopped measuring my presence by how comfortable it made other people feel. Weeks later, I sat in my new apartment holding a simple cup of coffee, looking at nothing in particular. And I realized something I hadn't fully understood before that day in the hall. They didn't almost erase my family from a photo. They revealed how easily they believed it could be done. And I was no longer the kind of person who would stand still while someone tried. If you've ever been pushed out of your own place in someone else's story, I want you to remember this. You don't have to argue for space that already belongs to you. You just stop moving when they ask you to disappear. And that is where everything changes. If this story resonated with you, comment below and share your experience. Because so many people go through versions of this silence before they find their voice. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe, because sometimes the most powerful moment isn't when people push you out. It's when you stop letting them decide where you stand. And that was the first time I realized something simple but permanent. I wasn't in their frame anymore. I was in my own.